Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast, brought to you by Rocket Agency. I'm your host, James Lawrence. Welcome back to the Smarter Marketer podcast. I'm here today with Henry Innis from Mutinex. Henry, welcome to the pod.
Nice to be here, James. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited for the chat today. So I'll just do a quick introduction for listeners who might not have heard of you or the organization before. So Henry is the CEO and co-founder of Mutinex, a business designed to disrupt marketing measurement. Mutinex has gone from being a small Australian analytics consultancy in 2017 to a global SaaS company now valued at over $130 million. You've grown rapidly by productizing marketing mix modeling into a platform called Growth OS. And today you're working with major brands like Samsung, Asahi, ING, Domino's, Kia, Deluxe to essentially help businesses make better decisions across billions of dollars of marketing spend. And Henry, you moved across to the States in 2024, I believe, to lead the push of Mutinex into the US market, which I guess is the next chapter of the business. So welcome to the pod.
Yeah, thanks, James. And I think already led the push, really. I think the US business is now doing pretty well by itself. We work with Hershey's, Churro, Whirlpool, out in those Olaplex, out in those markets. So yeah, definitely it's a big and growing part of our business.
It's awesome. It's really cool. If we're jumping into the conversation around Mutinex and I guess where the product is now and use cases and all those types of things, I think just quickly, prior to starting the business, what were you doing and like what led to the start of the business in the day?
I was in the data arm of Y&R at the time, VML before that. This is before they were all smashed together and merged in the mega mergers that kind of plagued the 2020s. And we were really focused on trying to figure out ROI on creative campaigns, what our best allocation of resources was to maximize a campaign. So not too dissimilar. My co-founder and I, we planned to found our own business inside of WPP. And that plan got kiboshed with some changes to leadership and things like that. And so we just felt it was best us going it alone. And we actually started the business in, I think it was late 2019, actually, not 2017.
Yeah.
And you could not have picked a worse time to start a business, to be frank with you. You walked straight into COVID, and off the back of COVID, walked straight into high inflation. It hasn't been a particularly easy few years, I would say, but the objective of the business when we started it was we'd just spoken to that many customers and clients at the time who every single one of them shared the same pain point, which was, how do I allocate my capital well and effectively for growth? Do I put it in the pricing? Do I put it in the media? How do I make those trade-off decisions? And their only options at the time was one of two things. Either they made the decision on incomplete information because their data wasn't well organized and it was very hard to do anything with it, or they made their decision-making off very untimely information, because once they had the data organized to run models at scale, this is pre-cloud and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It was a very difficult and challenging task. There weren't many people who were able to do it. There were a number of consulting firms who ran these models over 4, 5, 6 month build periods. And of course, if you've ever been in media, if someone tells you, oh, we've got an insight from 6 months ago, and we'd love to tell you how that insight applies to the media market today, the person planning the media will look at them and go, that's some good archaeology you've done there, but let us get back to the real job. And so I think that was at the center of why we founded the business. We felt that timely insights that encapsulated the total business's growth were important. I don't really think we knew the shape of the business, what the business would become back then. We probably thought it would be more of an ROI consultancy, but in 2021, we decided to make it a software as a service business. And there are a few reasons for that. One, I think COVID gave us space to do it. And I think two, we felt that the business could give better service, better answers, and be used more consistently if there was much lower latency for a client to use the actual product. One of the problems that you have with products is if they have to interface through the people in the business to interface with the data. So someone has to pick up the phone to me, Henry, and then I go and interrogate the data. Ultimately, I'm making that I'm getting that data through a lens of opacity, and there is a lag to that as well. That's just very human. And so we thought removing that would make a lot of sense. But what we wanted to do.
And just for those listeners that might not necessarily be across this space, can you explain marketing mix modeling, what it is,
Yeah.
where it's come from, and how it works?
So what it essentially is, if you think about how measurement really came in vogue, let's call it in about 2008, as Meta and Google really started to take vogue. They had a pretty novel idea. It wasn't the idea of advertising ROI was around before this, but really it took into the zeitgeist at the moment, which is when you spend $1 in advertising, you get some form of sales back, and you can understand that an ad was in a sale was influenced by a certain piece of advertising or a certain decision. That really came up through the digital platforms. For a long time, since about the 1960s, very advanced and sophisticated businesses have done that another way by building quite complex regression models. What the regression model basically means is they look for when a week in sales, they see sales lift, they look for, okay, around that sales lift, did we see any other variables going up? And do we see those variables going up consistently every time we see sales going up at its simplest form? The market mix models have gotten a lot more advanced because those regressions have gotten a lot more advanced. We know a lot more about marketing today. So we know, for example, that TV has a halo effect on search, which then will help lift the number of people searching for the ad, which then will lift the performance of search engine marketing. So at its simplest, the regressions before we had were just quite simple. Show me what variables lifted before. Now, as we've gotten a larger and larger body of evidence driven by a lot of the institutions and things like that, we're able to start to say, actually, we know that marketing works like this. Now tell me what's happening in this business based on these rules that we know. And that's what you would call a Bayesian market mix model. It's a very fancy technical word for it. But in effect, what we're doing is we're trying to look at when something happens, what else did we see happening around it? Yeah, and so that it's become in vogue because, in particular, two things have happened. One, a lot of the attribution via pixels, people have realized that's not quite how marketing works. There's a lot of work that happens before that last click to make that click happen. And I think the second thing as well is we used to have a lot of attribution models that track people through cookies and things like that. There's been a lot more signal loss. I think coupled with that is you have a much tougher economic climate. So you have these three forces. One is my normal tool for understanding what everybody saw has been massively degraded in its effectiveness. Two, I've got a much better understanding of marketing that the last click is not where the click came from. And three, I've got a lot more CFOs asking what drives our business, what drains our business, what did pricing do, what did media do, how do they work together, because they're confronting more and more tough economic times. And so that's led to an explosion in software as a service, SaaS platforms. We're not the only ones. There are other groups like Recast who are pretty fantastic. The Cassandra guys in the EU are also another really good example of a player that works with much smaller businesses than us. And so there's lots of kind of examples and permutation.
Yeah, cool. That's a really good overview. And just a clarification, because you'll hear of media mix modeling and market mix modeling. Same thing, different thing. Is it just a semantic difference or?
No, it's quite a big difference. So media mix modeling refers to, I just put the media spend in and the sales in. The problem with that is I can observe a lift in sales, but I may have run a 30% discount. Now, in a media mix model, it will only see the media lifting, and so it will only attribute that sales lift to the media. In a market mix, you're bringing in all the variables that would affect the business. So media mix suffers from something called omitted variable bias, which basically means, in English, we've missed a bunch of things. And so as a result, we're overstating the impact of the thing that's currently in the model. I think that the reason people do media mix is because it's easier, because to collect the data on complex pricing and stuff like that, and to understand how those things work, it's a much more complex beast to go into market mix than media mix. And for many businesses, they're okay with just getting the directional read off it.
And the downside being you might be getting more correlation, not causation.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. I think that's correct. Most of the time, you'll see correlations happening. And there's two ways to get to causation. The gold standard is experimentation. So if I want to minimize the risk of me overstating a variable through correlation, once you see all correlations, you've got less of a chance of saying this thing spiked and it was just spiking because something else was spiking. You're more likely to see that as a modeler as a result. So I think that's why people focus on it.
Yeah. So can you maybe just go into some specifics around what does Mutinex actually do? What kind of, because in terms of you conversate, what you noted before around one of the big problems previously being just time, right? Like the fact that you're looking back 6 months, a year, you're looking at old data. I suspect that part of the solution is to be getting data coming in closer to real time. Be so interested in the types of factors that the system's looking at. Is it weather, like all kinds of different things to give listeners an idea as to how the
Yes.
platform works?
So it's weather, it's competitive spare, and it's the market factors like CPI, fuel increases, trying to call moves is currently an event in many models. And then there's other factors like there's paid media spend, pricing, discounts, offers, trade media, brand equity measures. All of those things generally get brought in. So they're fairly large beasts. I think what we have done quite successfully is we made it relatively easy for someone to put unstructured data in. So if you think about how I would do a data project 6 years ago, I would have formatted everything super neatly and then sent it off to the modelers. We don't really need to do that anymore. And I think that we basically can start to take a lot more like unstructured data. The CSV report that you're looking on a week to week basis can be hoovered up by the systems. And so that's been a big shift. And we invested a lot in that 2023 to do that. Our business didn't really hit an inflection point until that point.
Yeah. Okay. And where are the use cases particularly strong, and where do you find, like you mentioned the European kind of competitor being better with smaller businesses? I presume that there's some requirement here for big enough data sets, big enough spends, enough online, offline data to make it worthwhile, or?
Very hard to estimate a brand new business, for example, with a model. I think that's an incredibly challenging thing to do. And I think you need some depth in data. You need some understanding of what works, what doesn't. And I think for us, the juice got to be worth the squeeze, right? I always say to people, if you're running a $10,000 media budget, it's probably not worth going and investing in a media mix model or a market mix model. You're much better just going and investing in good incrementality testing, or you're much better just using first click attribution or something like that. So there are different ways to approach the problem based on scale. I think as with all things, it's about how complex your environment is. More complexity generally requires more modeling, and it's what's your return on effort, because a lot of these things are really effort based. SaaS platforms bring down the raw cost, but there's still some degree of effort to them.
Yeah. And any difference B2B, B2C? Is it?
Not in my experience, no. Although having said that, B2B enterprise is a very hard thing to model. Like you've got to go and model, say, enterprise leads as opposed to enterprise sales is a good example of that. So generally getting close to the marketing action is what you need to do.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
And then what impact AI? Like I presume there's a lot of work going on with AI in the last kind of couple of years. Like what's the product plan there?
So I think you've got to break AI down into what it's trying to do. I think pre-artificial intelligence, a lot of quite high value tasks were priced very highly. What AI is allowing us to do is to take very high value tasks, and it's diminishing the value of those tasks immensely. Yeah. But allowing you to scale the repetition of those tasks immensely. So a really good example of that is production assets. For me to do a photo shoot 5 years ago was quite a lot of work. To my mind, it's much easier now for me to generate 500 shoots today And that's brought the value of that task down considerably. So I think our supply is much, much greater in terms of intellectual capital, and that's bringing the cost down dramatically, as you would expect. But I think the explosion on the other side is that there's a lot more demand. My suspicion is that demand for services, production, content, all of these different things that everyone says is going to be destroyed by AI is going to massively explode. Now, how does that apply to our business? Market mix modeling used to be a very costly exercise, and so therefore we would not go hyper granular on the models because there was a pretty large cost to that, right? For me to run 500 models for a major US brand would probably cost me, even if I've got a fair degree of automation, I'd still have probably 5 or so people working at that scale to maintain and run that. Now I can do that at a fraction of the people. And so that allows the average business to scale up into a lot more MMMs, a lot more granularity than they otherwise would. The second kind of thing is that I would have to structure a lot of the data. And so intuitively, I would have a requirement to have a lot of data engineering or data maturity for these sorts of businesses to make this work. And again, AI has made that very high value task very cheap. So I can now have lots of brands engineered ready for these models without necessarily needing to have a lot of money behind them. And then the third aspect as well is the insight layer. Usually I'd have to have a bunch of very smart people to interpret these models and apply them in very clever ways. Now AI has actually made it very easy to read these models and get value out of them and ask questions to them with a translation layer. All of those things contribute effectively to turning, I think the sector is really going to reinvent itself. And I think most sectors are like this. There's a wave of services-based sectors that are effectively flipping from being high value, low volume to high volume, low value businesses. And so I think structurally, that's how I think about AI. Practically, we're launching AI agents and agentic workflows into our product constantly to begin to take on more and more of the outcomes and the outcomes work that our clients do. To see in the future us being able to provision growth as a service back to the market. But I think we're some way off that in the product roadmap, but that's where we want to be in the medium term.
Have you felt like, if you look back at the product 2 years ago to now,
Completely different.
yeah, is it just transformative in terms of the actual results you're driving for clients?
Yeah, I would say that previously, let's just take an average query through our AI interface in our agentic workforce. I reckon the average query would have taken our marketing science people, let's call it 10 hours to answer. Like last week, we did 1,000 queries. Some weeks we'll do 3,000. It's all quite variable, but call it so 10,000 hours. So for me to be able to service that, previously I probably, if I 10,000 divided by 38, 10,000 hours divided by 38, I probably need about 260 people to service that. So the volume and velocity at which people can get value out of these things is greatly improved. I do think that AI is raising the intellectual floor. It's much harder with the world of AI. We talk about AI hallucinations a lot, things like that, but it's much harder to be really stupid in the world of AI. There's something to be said about the intellectual floor significantly raising. I never see really a bad deck or a really badly architected email. That averaging, you might be able to tell if something's AI. That averaging out of really mediocre communication and work has been quite dramatic in the past 6 months. We've seen that in our own product and how people interact with our products.
Yeah, I haven't thought about, because obviously humans make mistakes, right? So it's the whole hallucination thing is analogous to that. But the concept of lifting up at the bottom end, I haven't thought of it from that viewpoint. Interesting.
Yeah, when was the last time you saw a really poorly structured email, that read exceptionally poorly? Yeah, it just doesn't really happen anymore. Most people who are really shit at this stuff who are really shit at communication, they're running it through ChatGPT now, right? And so the intellectual floor has been significantly raised. I haven't seen a bad deck in months because people are just getting really good at it.
But how are you finding the business culture in America? I think particularly from a marketing viewpoint, what are the similarities in the outlook there? But also I think probably more interesting for Australian marketers, the differences, how the marketing works run operationally in America.
The differences, let's start with similarities. Similarities in the language. That's about it. So I think the Americans have a very high risk-taking culture. They probably don't bias towards research and being thoughtful about things. They bias towards action and testing things, which, and they have a much higher acceptance of failure correspondingly. They don't mind failing at something as long as they do it quickly. So I think the Americans are impressive there. I think the Americans have been impressive for some time now. I think where the Americans are going and where they operate far less on relationships than Australians do. An Australian will rely on relationship first, which allows you as well, when you're going through a bad time, to have a solid way to work through things. Like the Australian instinct is to try to work through things together. I think the American instinct is just to move on. It has its strengths and weaknesses. I think you don't build as long-term meaningful partnerships there versus as in Australia. But I think on the flip side, you do get a lot more signal from the market if you're not doing things well there. And I know that because someone fired me quite willingly in my first year there. And they did it quite quickly, much more aggressively than I would have thought.
Interesting observations. I find that interesting. And how's the kind of outlook over there from a kind of media and marketing kind of viewpoint?
Two camps. You have the international businesses, and the international businesses with international supply chains are probably a little bit more spooked at the moment. And then you have the domestic businesses. I think it's very important to understand in America that they are a net exporter of oil. So the Strait of Hormuz impacts their domestic situation a bit, but it's less existential than, say, Australia. It's less existential than, say, Europe. So I think that's an important piece of geopolitical context. Most marketers there are always planning to grow and are always looking for ways to grow. That is their culture. They don't have many businesses that sit at the 50, 60% market shares that Australia has. Their landscape tends to be more fragmented. And that makes the hyper competition for growth a lot more important to them. So I think that they have some differences and some changes like that. Yeah.
Interesting. You guys published a really good white paper this year on Is Your Organization Measurement Ready in 2026? So we'll include a link to that in the show notes. I was reading through it, preparing for the conversation today. There's a really nice phrase, which is marketing has changed faster than measurement. I think that's kind of a nice framing. I think it'd be good if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think that, you look at the volume of variables and the disciplines that we have to deal with as marketers. Marketing has gone from a profession where we ran one campaign on 6 channels once a year to a continuous smorgasbord of campaigns run across a plethora of channels, with a plethora of external forces also buffeting us because everyone's changing price every week as well. The ability for somebody to change and respond to the market has dramatically increased. It's never been easy to buy ads, to change creative, to change my price, to run discounts, to run offers. And that means the market is hyper reactive. People are moving and reacting to what they see in the market, what signals they get back in the market. I think most measurement systems just have not kept pace with that. If I look at most organizations doing market mix modeling, they do it once a year. They might do incrementality testing once or twice a year. And that means that I'm getting signal at a much slower pace. It would be a little bit like me driving with yellow pages when I could buy a fucking GPS. On one, I'm getting course corrections and I know which way I'm turning on a street-to-street basis. On the other, I'm having to sit out, pull it out once every month or so.
Good. And how does marketing mix modeling deal with brand versus performance?
I think they're separate. So I think on myth bust one thing, the idea that a brand ad does not sell anything today, but magically sells stuff in 2 years is bullshit. I don't think anybody sees that. I think the effect of a brand ad can be realized over 2 years. Yeah. You get the effect and then it bleeds and it has a very long tail effectively. But this idea that you never see a sales response from a brand ad, I think is not correct. My general feeling is that we see this sharpen the models in 2 ways. One is that performance media tends to be demand capture. So it tends to be capturing demand. So it tends to have a high synergy with the upper funnel channels. I think the second thing is we tend to see that the brand media has a longer ad stock or memory effect. And the ad stock means how much I saw that ad 3 weeks ago and it influenced me to walk into the car dealership, that type of thing.
Yeah.
So, and so that's where you see the differences. Generally, a brand versus performance channel would be segmented. If I'm buying Meta in a reach and frequency basis, I would separate that from Meta as on a performance marketing basis. That type of thing.
Interesting. Yeah, I think Ritson says something along the lines of good long form marketing can have a good short term impact, but rarely does short term marketing have a long term impact.
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think that's a good articulation of it. I think System 1 has a pretty similar view as well from memory, where they find that ads that are good and have high emotional resonance also deliver high sales spikes or something along those lines.
Yeah, interesting. Just in terms of wrapping up, we fast forward 2 years into the future. What do you think the best performing marketing teams will be doing in terms of measurement versus the ones that are the laggards?
I think the laggards firstly will be optimizing per channel. I think marketers who operate in silos are going to increasingly be caught out. And to some degree, your measurement system dictates how your behaviors work. So if your measurement systems are siloed and channel by channel, inherently your execution will be siloed and channel by channel. I think marketers that bring everything together and treat themselves like capital allocators or like hedge funds, they're going to be the ones who get really smart across the ecosystem and they're able to distribute capital very efficiently. And I think they're going to be the ultimate winners in all of this.
Nice one. Henry, thanks so much for coming onto the pod, mate, and good luck with the growth, both in Australia, but also globally and into the States.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me, James.
Thanks, mate.